Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. Today, we'll focus on a shared belief. All teachers are teachers of language and content. Whether you teach math, science, social studies, language arts, PE, art, or technology, language is the vehicle through which students access your content. Our purpose today is to better understand multilingual learners, their strengths, their language acquisition journey, and how instructional choices can either open or close doors to learning. By the end of this session, you'll have practical strategies tied to language stages designed to support both language growth and grade-level content success. Please take this opportunity to pause the presentation, download our note catcher and resource page, then reflect on the following 2 prompts. What does it mean to me that all teachers are teachers of language? Where in my classroom do I already support language intentionally? Multilingual learners are not defined by their English proficiency level. They bring rich assets to our classrooms: multiple languages, different ways of solving problems, and varied cultural perspectives. But while they bring so much, they often face barriers that aren't reflective of their ability, but in access. Access to language, access to instruction, and access to participation. With this in mind, I invite you to take a moment and review how this mindset is reflected in Cherry Creek School District's core values and how your role is reflected in these values. For example, in literacy, we intentionally plan for both content and language objectives so that our multilingual learners can access grade-level tasks. In disproportionality, we use data to guide grouping and participation structures that ensure every learner has an equitable opportunity to engage. And in whole well-being, we create classroom routines that invite active participation and meaningful interactions so that all students feel safe taking risks. Let's set the stage for today's learning by walking through the key learning objectives for this session. First, integrating language and content objectives. Throughout this webinar, you'll learn how to design lessons that don't make students choose between understanding the content or understanding the language. We'll look at how to embed academic language development into grade-level instruction so rigor is maintained while access is expanded. Second, using WIDA and district-aligned frameworks. We'll dive into tools like the WIDA can-do descriptors and proficiency level descriptors. These help us differentiate instruction across language proficiency levels, ensuring each student, whether they're silent and receptive, speech emergent, or advanced fluency, has a meaningful way to participate in the learning. Third, implementing evidence-based strategies. You'll hear about hands-on strategies such as intentional grouping, oracy building routines, sentence frames, visuals, and other linguistic scaffolds. These aren't add-ons, they're the bridge that connects language to understanding in math, science, social studies, and beyond. Fourth, using data and formative assessment. We'll explore how to use student data, not just access scores, but classroom observations, exit tickets, and language samples to identify strengths and needs. This helps us plan supports in Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction and gives students feedback that actually moves learning forward. Finally, creating inclusive, asset-based learning environments. We want our multilingual students to feel seen, valued, and empowered. So we'll talk about how to build classroom communities that honor students' home languages and cultures, encourage collaboration, and view multilingualism as an asset, not a barrier. By the end of this session, you'll walk away with tools, strategies, and a mindset that supports both language and content growth for every learner. All right, let's jump in.
Stages of language acquisition. Language development happens in stages, but it is not always linear. Multilingual learners grow from silent and receptive to early production, speech emergence, intermediate fluency, and eventually advanced fluency, which is equivalent to on-grade level academic language. But progress isn't always the same for every student. Some may speak confidently but struggle with writing. Others may read well but hesitate to speak. These stages aren't labels meant to hold students back. They are guides, helping us focus not on what students cannot do, but on what they can do right now and what they're ready for next. When we know their stage, we can provide just right language supports that move them forward. Take a moment to review the prompt on your page 2 of your note catcher and pause the video if you need to. Which language stages do I see most often in my classroom? Do I adjust my instruction based on language stage? Instead of asking, why can't this student write a full essay yet, we should ask, what language is this student able to use right now? And what's the next step? This helps us see progress, not deficits. Now that we know the names of each stage, let's dive deeper into each one. The first stage of language acquisition is called the silent and receptive stage, according to Stephen Krashen. This stage is also known as the pre-production, starting, or entering stage. Students typically remain at this stage for a few weeks to 6 months. Some students may remain at this stage longer than 6 months. Take a moment to pause the presentation and review the characteristics, needs, strategies, and supports for students in the silent and receptive stage of language acquisition. While there are many characteristics of students present in the silent receptive phase, the two that I want to draw your attention to are that students are developing their listening and BICS. BICS stands for Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills. For example, each morning, Diego's teacher greets students at the door. Diego doesn't say much, but he smiles and listens carefully. One day, the teacher says, "Good morning, Diego. Did you play soccer yesterday?" Diego quietly responds with a few words.
"Yes, with my brother."
This short, casual conversation is an example of basic interpersonal communication skills, or BICS, is informal, social language used in everyday interactions. Within content, this might look like: during a science lesson about the water cycle, the teacher explains evaporation and condensation. Diego doesn't fully understand the spoken words, but he watches the diagrams on the board showing the sun heating water, clouds forming, and rain falling. He copies the picture into his notebook and labels the arrows by looking at a visual word bank. Even though he isn't speaking much, Diego is actively learning by listening and observing his teacher and peers, using visuals, gestures, and images to make meaning, building foundational BICS in low-pressure situations like morning greetings or chatting with classmates at recess. During the silent receptive phase, students need time to be comfortable with their classroom environment, procedures, and structures. MLs also greatly benefit from explicitly taught vocabulary instruction that is accompanied by illustrated words and phrases. Following the silent and receptive stage, MLs move into the early production stage. This stage is also referred to as the emerging stage or beginning stage. MLs often remain in this stage for 6 months to a year. In the early production phase of language acquisition, students will begin to focus on contextual clues and are able to grasp the main ideas of messages. This will also mean that a student's reading and writing proficiency levels may vary. It is important for students in the early production phase to be provided with intentional daily opportunities to interact with oral and written language. This could look like free write about experiences in a daily journal or drawing and labeling diagrams and illustrations. MLs move into the speech emergence stage of language acquisition, also known as the developing stage. This stage can last between 2 to 4 years. During this stage in language acquisition, you can anticipate that MLs use mostly the present and past tenses, and they will begin to use the future tense. Concrete context with visual support is needed as well as background knowledge for texts and instruction. MLs at this stage greatly benefit from pre-reading activities to front-load content and concepts. This can be done by providing intentional opportunities to preview critical vocabulary, survey the text, and focus questions to establish the purpose for reading. Let's take a moment to listen to a couple of examples of what a student in the speech emergence phase might look and sound like in the classroom. Aisha is a 6th grade multilingual learner from Pakistan who has been in U.S. schools for almost 2 years. She is now in the speech emergence stage, where she can speak in short sentences, uses present and past tense comfortably, and is beginning to form future tense sentences, but still needs support. During group work, Aisha explains her thinking using both past and present tense. Listen in for this exchange in her dialogue.
Yesterday I read this chapter. It was about volcanoes. Now we make the poster together.
She extends this dialogue by using the future tense.
Tomorrow I will bring pictures for it.
She is demonstrating speech emergent level characteristics, but sometimes with errors like, tomorrow I bring pictures. She can communicate ideas clearly, but still makes grammatical mistakes that don't impede meaning or pauses to think of words. Additionally, in science class, the teacher introduces a lesson on plate tectonics. Aisha struggles with words like magma, crust, and mantle until the teacher shows a labeled diagram of Earth's layers, a short video with animation and real-life photos of lava and volcanic eruptions. With these visuals, Aisha connects the terms to something concrete and meaningful. Finally, Aisha benefits from pre-reading activities. Before reading the textbook passage, the teacher does a pre-reading activity where students preview important vocabulary, magma, pressure, eruption with visuals, look at headings, diagrams, and captions in the text, answer a focus question, why do volcanoes erupt, share what they already know about earthquakes/volcanoes from their home country. Because of this, when Aisha reads, she understands the purpose and follows the content more confidently.
At this stage in language acquisition, multilingual learners are entering what we call the intermediate fluency phase, also called the expanding stage. Most students remain in this stage for 3 to 4 years, depending on their exposure to academic language and access to meaningful instruction. A key point to note at this stage in language acquisition is, in accordance with Colorado Department of Education, once a student reaches an overall proficiency level of 4.0 or higher and an overall literacy score of 4.0 on Access, the state no longer requires them to receive direct language development services and are therefore redesignated to monitor status for 2 years. During this stage, MLs continue to benefit from supports that are similar to those that native-speaking students receive. Students in the intermediate fluency stage begin to think in the new language instead of translating. This also means that translation is typically no longer an appropriate support for students in this stage. Although students may still demonstrate incorrect grammar and verb forms, the errors do not interfere with communication. MLs will continue to need context clues in content areas. This can look like instruction in the genre writing process. As we move into level 5, advanced fluency, also referred to as the bridging state, it's important to keep in mind that language acquisition is not a linear process. Students do not progress evenly across all language domains. For example, a student might be a level 3 in speaking, level 2 in reading, level 5 in listening, and level 2 in writing. This type of language progression is common for MLs. In the last stage of language acquisition, MLs demonstrate a good command of technical and academic vocabulary, as well as idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms. For example, it's raining cats and dogs, or the term gonna and y'all. During this last stage of language acquisition, it is critical that MLs are provided with strategies and support with the same consideration as native English peers. Now that we've explored the stages of language acquisition from the silent period to expanding fluency, it's important to remember that no matter where a multilingual learner is on that continuum, our instruction matters. Language development doesn't happen by accident. It happens when we, as educators, intentionally design learning that supports both language and content. This brings us to the core idea on this slide: engaging multilingual learners effectively. When we plan with multilingual learners in mind, we are ensuring that language development is not an afterthought. It is integrated into every lesson. It's not an add-on, it's embedded into how we teach, how we question, and how we expect students to think and respond. When teachers intentionally plan for both content and language, they create equitable access to grade-level instruction. They empower students to express their thinking with confidence, even if they're still developing English. This kind of deliberate planning creates classroom environments where multilingual learners are engaged, challenged, and supported through purposeful scaffolds, not watered-down content, but meaningful support. Another key piece is using data, access scores, classroom observations, formative assessments to inform our decisions. This allows us to respond to student needs in real time and build on their strengths rather than focusing only on deficits. In short, instruction that keeps multilingual learners at the center is inclusive, responsive, and transformative. It helps every learner grow, not only in English, but in academic thinking and content knowledge, so they are prepared for success far beyond the classroom.
Every content area has its own language demands. In math, students justify, compare, explain their thinking. In science, they make claims, support them with evidence, and explain their reasoning. When we name the function first, explain, argue, compare, we can better support the language students need to complete the task. The goal isn't just to do the math or science, it's to talk like mathematicians and scientists. Therefore, we have created a planning document to support planning for intentional language instruction in all academic content areas. Now that we've talked about why intentional planning matters for multilingual learners, let's talk about how we do that in practice. A simple way to remember the key components of effective instruction for MLs is through the acronym LEADS. L stands for Language and Content Objectives. This means every lesson should clearly communicate not only what students are learning, the content, but also how they will use language to show their thinking. For example, students will describe the water cycle using sequencing words like first, then, next, and finally. E is for expectations, and specifically rigor. MLs deserve access to challenging grade-level content. Rigor doesn't mean harder worksheets, it means deeper thinking with the right support. We hold high expectations and scaffold to help students reach them, not lower the bar. A stands for active participation. MLs need to use language to learn language. So instead of passive listening, we create opportunities for students to speak, collaborate, write, draw, act out, and engage with one another. Think, pair, share. Sentence frames, group tasks. Everyone has a role. D is for data-driven instruction. This includes access scores, classroom observations, writing samples, and informal check-ins. Data helps us adjust instruction in real time and target supports based on strengths, not just gaps. S is for strategies and scaffolds. This is where we make learning accessible. Visuals, word banks, models, graphic organizers, sentence stems. All of these allow students to access complex ideas while developing academic language at the same time. So when we think about engaging multilingual learners effectively, LEDS gives us a roadmap: clarity in language and content goals, high expectations, active participation, intentional use of data, and purposeful scaffolds. Next, we're going to look at how this actually comes to life in classrooms through real examples and practical tools you can use tomorrow. We just walked through the LEADS framework: language and content objectives, expectations, active participation, data-driven instruction, and strategies and scaffolds. Now you might be wondering, how does all of this fit into the work we already do in our PLCs? PLCs are built around 4 essential questions, and LEADS aligns with each of those questions in powerful ways. 1. What do we want students to learn? LEADS helps us answer this by intentionally naming both content objectives and language objectives. Instead of just asking, what math concept are we teaching, we're also asking, how will students use language to show their thinking, explain, justify, compare, describe? 2. How will we know if they've learned it? This connects to the data-driven instruction part of LEADS. We use access data, classroom assessments, writing samples, and observations to see how students are progressing, not just in content, but in academic language. 3. What will we do if they don't learn it? That's where strategies and scaffolds come in. Sentence frames, visuals, modeled responses, word banks, partner talk. All of these are intentional supports to reteach and make learning accessible when students are stuck. 4. What will we do if they already know it? This is tied to the E in LEADS: high expectations and rigor. If students already understand the content or language goal, we extend. We ask them to justify, debate, create, or apply their learning in new contexts, rather than giving them more of the same. So really, LEADS doesn't add more to our plate. It sharpens the work we're already doing in PLCs. It gives us a consistent lens to make sure multilingual learners are not just included, but fully engaged and supported in grade-level learning. Next, we'll look at what this looks like in actual PLC conversations and planning tools. With this in mind, let's delve deeper into the L of LEADS, which is language and content objectives, and is directly linked to our first PLC question: what do we want students to learn? Language and content objectives are clear, measurable goals that identify what students will learn in both content and language, ensuring multilingual learners develop academic language alongside subject knowledge. Now that we've connected LEADS to our PLC work, I want to zoom in on the first piece, language and content objectives, and show what this looks like in practice. When we plan any lesson, we always consider what students need to learn in terms of content. But for multilingual learners, we also need to determine what language students need to access, use, and produce in order to demonstrate that learning. This tool breaks down language and content objectives into 2 key parts. Language functions: what students are doing with language academically, like describing, explaining, comparing, summarizing, or asking questions. Language forms: the linguistic tools they need to do it, sentence stems, vocabulary, grammar structures, transition words, etc. For example, a teacher might say, students will describe mammals using adjectives and adjective phrases. Here, describing is the function, and adjectives/adjective phrases are the forms students need in order to do it well. You'll notice the links on this page, for example, functions and forms of language, and the guide for developing objectives. Since you may not be able to click those directly on the slide, we've added them to your note catcher. You can open that document to access. Go ahead and take a moment to open your note catcher.
Now, let's take a closer look at the E and A of LEADS and how they relate to PLC questions 3 and 4. What will we do if they don't learn it? And what will we do if they already know it? The E in LEADS considers rigor as high expectations and cognitively challenging tasks that push all students to think deeply and apply their learning, while ensuring appropriate supports are in place for multilingual learners to succeed. As we move into the second part of LEADS, expectations and rigor, this is where we ask ourselves, are we providing multilingual learners with access to grade-level thinking, or are we unintentionally lowering expectations because of language barriers? This slide reminds us that rigor isn't about giving students more work or harder worksheets. True academic rigor means students are engaging in grade-level tasks within their zone of proximal development and supported with scaffolds so they can think deeply, even if they are still developing English. When multilingual learners engage with high-level tasks aligned to standards and teachers provide supports like visuals, sentence frames, modeling, or small group dialogue, students are able to access complex content and grow both academically and linguistically. When thinking about students actively participating during instruction, it is critical to have intentional opportunities for all students to engage meaningfully in lessons through speaking, listening, reading, and writing, which is especially critical for language development. We know multilingual learners can't develop language by just listening. They have to use language to speak, write, collaborate, ask questions, and make meaning with others. That's the heart of this LEADS component, active participation. When planning lessons, we're not just asking, what do I want students to learn? We're also asking, how will I ensure they are actively using language to process that learning? This means building in purposeful opportunities for students to talk, listen, read, and write with one another at the word, sentence, and discourse level. Examples may include think, pair, share with sentence frames, Kagan cooperative structures like rally coach or numbered heads together, strategic grouping, pairing students intentionally for language growth, accountable talk with modeled academic language, modeling and guided practice before independent responses. Let's go a little deeper into why active participation, especially in oral language, matters so much for multilingual learners' reading comprehension. Research tells us that children develop comprehension through meaningful oral interactions. The more they engage in conversation, the more their comprehension of language grows. Over time, students begin to recognize language patterns and anticipate meaning in texts because they've heard and used that language orally. So, for students who are orally fluent in English, they often have a basic bank of vocabulary and internalized language structures that help them make predictions and construct meaning while reading. But this connection looks different for English learners. Why? Below, you'll notice it highlights that for multilingual learners, oral fluency doesn't always mean they have the academic vocabulary, grammar, or syntax needed to fully comprehend grade-level texts. When texts include unfamiliar language, complex sentence structures, or content outside their background knowledge, comprehension becomes much more challenging. This is especially true when students haven't yet internalized the language patterns of academic texts. So, what does this tell us? Children need daily opportunities to develop oral language with others, not just social talk, but structured academic talk. They also need exposure to print-rich academic language so they can start recognizing and using the vocabulary, syntax, and grammar that support comprehension. Oral language isn't separate from reading, it's the foundation of it.
The D in LEADS refers us to data-driven instruction, which allows us to examine the PLC question, how will we know if they have learned it? Data-driven instruction looks like ongoing assessment and analysis of student progress in both content and language, used to inform instruction and adjust supports as needed. As we continue through LEADS, the next key component is data-driven instruction. This is where we shift from assumptions about student needs to actual evidence. For multilingual learners, data is more than test scores. It includes language proficiency, classroom observations, writing samples, participation, and even what students share about their experiences and prior schooling. To use data effectively, teachers can ask themselves questions like, who are the MLs I serve? Where are they in their language development journey? What is their current proficiency in each domain? Listening, speaking, reading, and writing? Are they on track with both language growth and content learning? What strengths, funds of knowledge, or home languages can I intentionally leverage in instruction? What does the data tell me, not about what they can't do, but about what they can do right now? When we use data this way, it helps us plan instruction that is targeted, equitable, and rooted in student strengths rather than deficits. As a reminder, the links on this slide, such as the WIDA can-do descriptors and sample data reflection questions, are available in your note catcher. Please refer to that now if you haven't already, so you can explore the resources more deeply after this session. The last component in LEADS is the S for scaffolds and strategies. This S connects us to the question, what will we do if they don't learn it? Scaffolds and strategies are intentional supports such as visuals, sentence frames, modeling, and graphic organizers that make content and language accessible to all learners, particularly multilingual students. As we move into the final part of LEADS, strategies and scaffolds, this is where everything comes together. Scaffolds are the temporary supports we put in place to make learning accessible while still keeping expectations high. They help bridge the gap between a student's current language abilities and what the grade level task requires. But it's important to remember, scaffolds are not meant to lower the task. They're meant to raise access, and they should be gradually removed as students gain independence and confidence. On this slide, you'll see examples of scaffolds such as repetition and modeling, visual supports like graphic organizers, pictures, diagrams, and anchor charts, sentence stems and frames to support oral and written responses, total physical response, TPR, and gestures, word banks, translated key terms, or strategic use of L1, first language, interactive reading supports like text annotation or think-alouds. These strategies allow students to participate in grade-level learning without needing to fully master the language first.
Now that we've explored scaffolds in general, I want to highlight how scaffolding also plays a key role in building content knowledge, not just supporting language. One of the most effective ways to do this, especially for multilingual learners, is through vocabulary that is connected to meaning, visuals, movement, and interaction. When vocabulary becomes active and playful rather than passive memorization, students are more likely to internalize and apply it. The resource linked on this slide, 5 Vocabulary Games That Build Content Knowledge by Hannah Bradley, is a great example of this. These games aren't just about learning words in isolation. They're about helping students use those words to construct meaning, make connections, and talk about complex ideas. These strategies align with research showing that students need multiple exposures to new words in context, and they need to use these words in speaking, writing, and problem solving, not just on flashcards. That link is available on your note catcher. Please make sure you have it open. You can click the title directly from there to explore the vocabulary games and even adapt them for your specific content area. As we come to the close of today's session, I want to leave you with a few key takeaways. First, when we teach with multilingual learners in mind from the very beginning, not as an afterthought, we create classrooms that are inclusive, responsive, and truly transformative. These aren't just language supports, they are high-quality teaching practices that benefit all learners. Second, our role is to empower students, not just to learn English, but to succeed in both language and content. When students can access grade-level instruction and use language to express their ideas, they don't just keep up, they thrive. And finally, this belief anchors everything we've talked about today. Every teacher is a language teacher. Whether you teach math, science, art, PE, or literature, you are also teaching the language students need to participate, think, and succeed in your classroom. So, as you head back to your PLCs, classrooms, and planning teams, ask yourself, how will I make language visible in my content? What scaffold can I add or remove to promote growth? And how will I ensure every student's voice is heard? Thank you for committing to this work and for making a difference for multilingual learners every day. Thank you for taking the time to learn about creating the best possible learning environment for your multilingual learners. If you have any questions or would be interested in further professional development, please contact us at ccsdlsas@cherrycreekschools.org.